Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon. This is Scale Your Sales podcast. Welcome to the Scale Your Sales podcast, listed number 9 of 42 best podcasts for every sales professional in 2021. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recommended by LinkedIn as one of 15 innovative sales influencers to follow in 2021. So my guest is a marketer turned sales leader, and through her company, EQ Sales, she uses behavioral science as a tool to influence and inspire buyers and salespeople. Welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, LJ Harries.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
It's been wonderful, and thank you so much for staying up, because I know, we're on the other side of the world, or you are. I'm not sure which one it is, but it's lovely to talk to you. I've been following you for quite a while now, so it's a real honor to have you on the podcast, LJ. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I was reading the research I did on you, I was really reading up about you using behavioral science as a tool to influence not only buyers, but also salespeople. Can you explain that to me?
Absolutely. Look, I actually learned how to sell through my time working in advertising agencies and as a marketer. Now, we often think in sales that marketing is sort of on the other end of the spectrum, but it's not. Both of those functions are really dedicated to educating, enticing, and ultimately influencing affinity and purchase. The only difference is that marketing do that en masse, sales do it on one-to-one. Now, when you think of the overall objective of advertising campaigns, it is to sell. And what they do in advertising is they use images and storytelling and price psychology, all of these wonderful ways to work with how we actually make decisions in order to create what is essentially an art versus science kind of delivery to get people to purchase. Now, it was when I moved into sales, I didn't really get any education like that, where marketing taught me messaging and storytelling and pitching as a performance and, the psychology behind questions and all of that good stuff. Sales kind of gave me a brochure and a phone and a target, and we're like, go get it. So I kind of floundered like a lot of people, and I just applied what I knew. And that was being able to frame information well. It was being able to tell a story with a case study. And suddenly I got a lot of traction from that. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's something here. Now, when I moved into leadership roles, somewhat of a different ilk of a lot of the other leaders, being a different gender, certainly being a different age group, I just noticed that there was a heavy-handedness with sales that was very much churn and burn. When you understand how people think and how that thinking relates to how they act, which is behavioral science, you can actually work with people's mindsets and get a lot more out of them. So in the same way I was able to influence salespeople in a one-on-one environment, I was able to do the same in a leadership position. And about 2.5 years ago, I went out to set about doing it by myself. And so far, I've been having an absolute ball. And that's what behavioral science is. It's really the connection of how we feel, how does that feeling affect our thought process, and then how does that thought drive our actions. So there's so many incredible examples of it. You'll notice it if you start to look at advertising in particular really well, and you'll start to see where it's been applied, and you can take those tactics and apply it in your one-to-one conversations and communication as well.
There is, the whole art and science behind sales, but I think we forget to marry the two.
We do. And I think we don't know what we don't know. And I think I speak on behalf of a lot of salespeople that there isn't a lot of tools in terms of understanding decision-making process. It's very much understand the sales process. It's tracking data. And as much as I think that all plays a role, we have to understand behavior, because sales is ultimately a very interpersonal service and relationship. And I think we miss the people element a lot. And that's why it becomes it can become really icky. I say icky because old school practice is a little icky to me. And that never resonated with me. I'm a younger generation. We didn't really grow up with the phone. So again, the disconnect between old school leaders and younger salespeople, and helping, just shift the balance and the dial and going, okay, cool. Well, instead of forcing that person to use the phone, I'll switch to social selling or whatever that may be. So there's a huge opportunity to learn from different salespeople, and then bring that all together into really strong leadership strategies.
And it's interesting you've just mentioned there about really understanding how people learn and actually not
Yes.
forcing them to behave in a certain way which it doesn't suit their personality. And if they're able to not only learn but also demonstrate the skills to in front of the customer also has different ways of learning as well. And when the two things marry together, that's when you get real connection. And that's what sales is about, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there's two things there that really resonated with me. The first, I always use a Winston Churchill quote, actually. And he says, I hate being taught, but I love to learn. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting to think. A lot of people don't learn in the traditional sense anymore. Adult learning has to be very practical. It has to be applicable immediately for it to be retained. It has to be simplistic. I think if you've been through any sales training, not only can it be incredibly boring, it is long, it's arduous, and you go back to your desk and you can't actually apply that. The second is always understanding that in any sales conversation, there's 3 conversations happening at any one time. There's the conversation I'm having with myself as a salesperson. There's the conversation the buyer is having with themselves as they listen to me, as a salesperson. What do I need to get across? What's the information I need to extract? The buyer's thinking, is this relevant to me? Do I trust this person? What's this going to cost? What's the risk? And then there's the conversation you have between you, which can also get muddled as well because of the different conversations in other people's heads. So helping people understand that communication without comprehension is irrelevant. And I think salespeople, we're notorious for wanting to get our point across, but we neglect to think that our point might not be what matters to the buyer. And, working to understand that, understanding the thought process is really critical to being relevant and valuable. And that's really, all you should be in sales, because once you can show value, you're going to be able to ask to put money to that. And that's what sales is, in my opinion.
Well, I completely agree with you. Scale Your Sales talks about speaking the buyer's language, but also really understanding the values, the outcomes that the buyer is trying to achieve. And I often talk on the podcast how the sales process is really broken, but we're really bedded into this thing. It's very internally focused, and it's about the numbers. And actually, sales is about relationships and the people. Now, it's not to say that you can sell only through the relationship. You've got to really understand the value transfer and the outcomes the customer wants and the return on investment, all of those things. The two are really important, but it's the process that we're selling. Really, it should be the buying process that we're bedded into and not the selling process, because buyers are the ones that have all the control nowadays. And I think that, you talked about a generational thing, and I think there is one generation gets it and the other generations is just so bedded into the sales process. So I'm really interested in your views on this.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. And, I work with a lot of sales teams, and I ask them, have you sat with your buyer and understood the buying process? And they look at me like I've got 5 heads. And I think just shifting the mindset and the rhetoric to this isn't actually about you. They say sales is entirely dependent on the attitude of the salesperson and not the buyer. And I believe that intrinsically. However, you have to understand what matters. And even by asking somebody their point of view and how they buy, you're already ahead of the competition, and immediately they're going to see that you're actually serving them. So that's a really great tactic to use as well.
Do you feel that the industry has shifted enough to be kind of customer and buyer centric?
No way, I wish. And, you just have to open up your other emails. I still get, I have an exercise I do with a salesperson. I was like, send your initial email and then print it out. And I want you to highlight every time you use what's called self-facing language. So I, me, my. And what you see, people are littered, and you'll see that in cold emails of people who really haven't been educated on how to sell, because all they do is talk about themselves. I can't see myself in any one of them. In fact, I've had one reach out and she referenced a blog, and I got a service from her because I thought, you know what, I was just so excited to see that someone had actually taken the time to understand my values and my values as a business. And I think I see that more often. I think with automated LinkedIn messages, I'll get 2 or 3 bots word for word in my inbox, and I put them right next to each other. And again, if they think that buyers are not privy to this, if we are not smart enough, like, they're taking themselves for a ride. And I don't think it's getting worse. I think it's more visible now because of digital selling, because the effects of a poor outreach because it stays there. And I tell you what, you can change businesses, but if you're still targeting that same prospect, it's really, you can see your ghosting, message. It doesn't go anywhere. And I think more and more, because of that permanency that comes with digital selling, particularly on a social side, how important it is for organizations to work with their sales teams to get better at this, because it follows you around for as long as you're in the industry.
Yeah. When I do talk about this to sales teams, I talk about it's a bad smell that, just hangs around in the room and won't go away. Yeah. What you're transferring is that bad smell onto the buyer, and it's like, oof, they really just don't want it. It's really icky. And I think when you visualize it, you think, oh no, I don't really want to transfer this bad smell on. We need to stop it. How? Yeah. Oh, I've been talking about this for the last, I don't know, prior to the pandemic, when I started this podcast, I was so fed up of it, and it doesn't seem to be going away. So, I know we're not customer centric enough, but it's changing, but not fast enough. What can we do? Yeah. How can we accelerate this? Because a lot of these old ways of selling are still hanging around. And actual fact, you'll know this as well, because we're both aware of on it, that there are many sales professionals, gurus, that are still banging on about the old sales process done in the old way, and many of the old strategies. You see them every day on LinkedIn, and they haven't adapted. So how can, LJ, I'm appealing to you, how can you really accelerate this change?
Look, you and I are working in our corners of the globe to do so. I really think that this is a leadership issue. I don't think this is a rep issue. I think the problem with sales has always been a leadership issue. I think there needs to be better support from salespeople to becoming leaders, because a leader is not a manager. Managing people and managing tasks and metrics does not help to grow skill sets. We need to lead with coaching. And I truly believe that once you can educate team leaders to actually lead as opposed to manage, what happens is that transfers a focus on task and output onto people and input. And that is what sales needs. It needs coaching on calls. It needs people filming their pitches. These are all things that don't happen because sales leaders become too busy, lost in the numbers, or stuck in meetings. They're not actually with their team trying to grow specific. It's all about input as far as I'm concerned. And sales is letting salespeople down because the focus is always on output. You're not going to get great output if you don't put great input in, and yet we still don't see it. I see more money go onto business cards than I do on training and development still.
So what do? You go into a traditional company, the sales leader has just moved in, they see that there's a need to change the culture and change the inputs. So they get you in. What's your starting point? How do you get to move that culture and get some of the managers to coach better and more often? What's your process?
Well, I love that you called culture, because that's absolutely where I work in. However, people don't brief me on culture, right? They think that they don't see that. They want better sales. They want better revenue. So holding a mirror to that is the first step. And that can be really uncomfortable because, they've brought me in. They think that I'm going to, get their staff to perform better. And I kind of go, let's start with you. But, culture is defined as, the habits and the thoughts and the attitudes of a team. And that's what you have to work with. You have to work with mindsets. You have to work with skill sets, and you have to have, objective coaching. I come in and I do what I call a culture barometer. So I survey and try to find the disparity between what leaders think and what salespeople think, and then I connect the dots. So I actually work with the sales team leaders to understand how to communicate, understand how to coach. Then we work on skills and strategy development, and then I'll train the team, and then I'll support them while they maintain. My clients tell me I've got the worst business model in the world, because I literally, once I'm out, this engine rolls to itself and I'm out the door, which I love. I'm going to use that on an ad somewhere, I've decided.
And well, that's the thing, is you don't want to encourage dependency. You want to encourage independence. It's the difference between fishing for someone and teaching them how to fish, and they can continue to fish for themselves. So I'm absolutely with you there. And I suppose it also depends on, I really like to impact change, and I can see that you're like that as well. I want to see the results as much as the customer does. And then once they've got the results, I want to move on to someone else that I can help to get results. And it's great when I come back 2 years later, they're further ahead of their progress, and they now want to deal with something else. So I think it's healthy to encourage a culture of independence.
Absolutely. And I think, we have an entrepreneurial hat, obviously. I have sold more with passion, coming in and being excited about this, than I have probably anything else. And I think you and I have to understand that inherently we have a different point of view on this, because we dedicate our lives to doing it. A lot of people who have landed in sales leadership are disengaged themselves. So how they're able to transfer it, they have no idea. Keeping in mind, quote unquote old school sales leaders, if they're not giving anything now, 20, 30 years later, imagine what they would have got at that time. So, I lead with a bit of empathy there, but also shake it up, get people out of their comfort zone and get them back finding the passion that they had. And once you have that, that's where you can really start to embed some, real cultural change, because positivity is a leadership strategy and it's infectious. And when you can lead with that, you drive better engagement and productivity. And as long as there's organizational trust and there's tools, you have the foundation for really sustainable high performance culture in a way that's in nowhere near icky.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So the listeners here will be ecstatic to hear your practical strategy that will enable them to build the buyer engagement, to be more aware of the behaviors that buyer requires and wants. So what practical strategy would you offer listeners?
Absolutely. I would recommend certainly an engagement first approach. A little bit of behavioral science is called the IKEA effect. Now, obviously IKEA furniture we build ourselves. Something happens when we contribute. So I believe that progression is always better than perfection. As a salesperson, be okay with going to market or speaking to your buyers at 70% and build that 30% with them. You touched on a very simple way to do that too earlier. Ask them, what is your buying process? How can I actually tailor what I'm doing to you? It's a very simple way to play the IKEA effect. What you'll find is if they are building a prop, if it's, an enterprise deal or whatnot, by the time you get to 90%, which is contract, they're already highly engaged. So really see buyers as not buyers, they're partners of yours. And just because they might not sell, you might not sell on this, always think about cultivating a network. Understand human psychological needs, seek to engage with them well after the sale, because really that's where trust is built. And that's how you maintain, and that's how you drive advocacy. And to me, that is the number one sales tool you can have is a buyer saying, this person's great to work with, because referrals, 80% more likely to convert. At the end of the day, people buy from people. Never forget that. You can have the best company name behind you, but if you're difficult to get hold of, or if you're complicated in your responses, people just will not work with you moving forward.
I absolutely love that. Thank you so much. There was so much in there, those practical strategies to remind people of really what's important, what we're here to do. So I want to take it back a little bit, LJ, and talk about, your experience working in sales. As you said, you weren't of the age of a typical sales leader. You weren't of the gender of a typical sales leader. So I'm really interested in your experience and going forward, what you see and what you know that works in terms of encouraging more diversity into, the sales industry.
Absolutely. So, like I said, I cut my teeth in agencies and marketing, and I was in agencies. You're surrounded by research, and you're surrounded by researchers, and you're surrounded by people who take a brief and really all band together to produce a really powerful tool. When I moved to sales, I really felt like there was no support. I felt disconnected from the leadership, and I certainly felt disconnected from any learning material because it was not the reality of how we sold. Showing me a sales funnel wasn't relevant to me at all. I needed to know, I think I was sort of just prior to 30 or whatnot. I wanted to know how to have a conversation. I needed to know how to hold myself in a meeting, how to have confidence, how to read data. More and more, I think data strategies are coming to the fore, which is great. I think it makes targeting easier. But then what? So I think more and more soft skills are going to come to the fold from a leadership capacity, absolutely. But I think it's more and more we're going to see that honed in really smart organizations because we can nurture better, we can ask better questions, we can demonstrate empathy better. And empathy is really defining the problem. And if you can't understand the problem enough, you can't expect to sell a solution. That's why I get so frustrated when people pitch to me on a first LinkedIn, like, you don't know me, you don't know anything about my business, even there's a lot around, but I know for sure you haven't looked at my profile because that's technology for you. So that's really frustrating that there's still a mindset of buy from me. Like, I'm not doing anything for you. You demonstrate that you know me well enough to allow me the vulnerability to open up. And that's what sales is. You're uncovering business problems. It's a vulnerable space, especially for business owners, who aren't necessarily in a large organization. And that's really important to understand, that you have to earn that right. And you earn that right by seeking to understand, not seeking to be understood.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So tell me more about some of the experiences you had becoming a sales leader.
I overcame them by saying enough was enough and starting my own business. I hit a point where there was just the same roundabout, and you just didn't feel heard, and that became frustrating. So regardless of my numbers doing well, I still wasn't getting a seat at the table, and I just I had a moment of clarity one day, and I thought, and I decided. I woke up the next day and I created a logo and I called it EQ Sales, as a very pointed response to what I felt was completely the opposite. And I've smashed it ever since. So thank you to that organization. Worked out for me.
Yeah. Well,
I know that's not for everybody, but for me it was.
It's not for everybody, but it does show your tenacity of just moving forward in a way that's powerful to you. So tell me, who is your hero or shero?
Yeah, look, it has to be my mother. I was raised by a single mum, and she took in me, she fostered kids. I think working in corporate's hard. I have nothing compared to 6 or 7 children in the house at one time. So she is truly my hero. I decided to start my business. COVID hit. I moved back home with my mum, determined to not have to pay my mortgage. And she did everything from make me coffee to buy me whiteboards to, come to my first Christmas party, which was just me, her and the dog. And that support while you're starting out, and while a lot of people are, there's a lot of, what are you doing kind of at the start of anyone who goes and puts themselves out there, particularly in a public space or in a really bold space, and says, I back myself, you face a lot of flack from that. So to have a woman, one of the strongest women I've had in my corner, she's always worked for herself, really hyping me up has meant the world to me. So she will always be my hero.
And I think all people need someone like that in their corner, whether it's a mother, father, a good friend, especially when you're going out on your own, and then the pandemic hit as well. So all the economic challenges that we're facing now, it's tough out there. It's tough in the sales industry. It's tough for buyers. But yeah, so it's great to have that. So here's to your mum.
Thank you very much.
So LJ, how can listeners get hold of you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's where I live and breathe. So you can follow me, LJ EQ Sales or LJ Harries, HARRIES, and follow EQ Sales. That's where all the learning is, all the behavioral science, all those real practical sort of tactics. You'll get a lot out of that. But please do connect with me. I'm always happy to meet people on the other side of the globe and learn how we work differently and share that learning, because that's what ultimately is going to get us all better.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, LJ. Thank you so much for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.